All right, everyone, we start off today with the German elections, actually. AfD winning big in several counties there, states, provinces, whatever you want to call them. Also, the far left surging as well. The old sort of Christian Democratic Union, sort of so-called centrist parties, taking a beating in Thuringia and Saxony, actually. I predicted that this would happen back in 2018. Link in the description. I can show you the exact video that I made. I'm not bullshitting you. This was obviously going to happen. Here's the problem. When you have a new political non-consensus, old-line centrist parties tend to be incapable of governing. The only thing that they can do is try to suppress upstart movements. And that's the whole problem. This happened in Germany before. It's called the Weimar era, by the way. The old conservatives and Democratic Party there, the Liberal Party, they lost the ability to govern because especially young voters realized that there were problems in society and people began to harangue, of course. So at first you have a very small Nazi movement and a very, very small communist movement. And what would happen is they would antagonize one another and antagonize the center. So the communists would go to the main public and say, look, the Republicans and the Democrats, I can't remember exactly the name of the party, they can't protect you from those Nazis over there. Look at those bad dudes. They're marching around, they're Sieg Heiling in brown shirts and stuff like that, breaking up bars. You need to side with us because we're capable of actually protecting society. And so the communist movement would grow at the expense of the centrists, mainly from the left, the liberal centrists. And the Nazis would then say, look, German people, the communist movement is growing. The communist threat is expanding. And the center can't do anything about it. Join us. And so the NSDAP began to grow. This is basically the same dynamic that we're seeing now. It was entirely predictable. I warned of it. Now, AfD, thankfully, it's not a Nazi party. When they're cast off as far right, that's, not entirely true. Okay, economically speaking, they have right-leaning tendencies. What a terrible thing that is. And they tend to be more isolationist, so basically keep Germany for the Germans. We see these movements propping up all across Europe. Just look at the French elections that we just had as well. Now, Macron's party not doing so well these days. This was predictable, though, because what happens is when people are pissed at the system, they vote the system out, or they attempt to do so, or they attempt to force it out. Younger individuals tend towards the more militant side. They're the fodder for, breaking up the bars, marching through the streets, stickering and stuff like that. Older voters, mainly, they're voting their self-interest economically. That's the tendency, and if the economic situation is not good, they're going to side with the youth. Now, which side they take, of course, is a different story. AfD doing much better than the far left, but between the two of them, squeezing out the center. This is exactly the situation that I warned would happen. The only saving grace is that AfD is probably not going to become another Nazi party. I have a feeling that the right wing will prevail in Germany. Germany, there's a tendency towards the moralistic and the very, very rigid in Germany. It's not like the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, it's very cosmopolitan. It's like, be yourself. Who cares? When you go over to Germany, there's a different feel, even right across the Dutch border. I've been to Germany. There is a very, very different feel. It's a feeling of stress, by the way. It's like we went to Munster. Okay, you get off the train. Now, you've got one part is again very rigid, very dogmatic, moralistic, old school and stuff, like with the soaring architecture. People very businesslike. They're Germans. But then you also have these enclaves where you had literally a commie tea shop, and I'm not shitting you. Right outside of the Munster train station, there is a Marxist tea shop. It's literally like a meeting hall for communists. It happens to be in a depraved location, which doesn't surprise me at all. They appear to have bordered it off with stolen shopping carts, actually. There's like heroin needles everywhere and stuff like that, graffiti. It doesn't surprise me in the least, but there's literally like a meeting hall for the Communist Party or something like that. When I saw that, I chuckled. You see some Antifa activity in the Netherlands, but it's nothing on the same order of that particular location in Munster. So the far left has made inroads. They did make gains. They got, I think it was 15% or something like that. AFD got over 30, which is good. The good news is that the leftoids are rising up less quickly than like the AFD types. The problem is that when the so-called far right, which is what it's cast off as being, which is being persecuted literally by the German government, when they rise up, the communists will antagonize based on that. And they'll go to the liberal voters and they'll say, look, you know, the fucking Nazis are coming. You've got to side with us. It'll be Weimar 2.0. All you need is an economic fallout, and it looks like we're on the precipice of a major world recession. That's literally all you need to light a little bit of a fire underneath the Germans right now. And when the Germans start getting antsy, when they pop off, bad things happen. We've seen this before. World War I, World War II, etc. I'm not, of course, blaming Germany for World War I. That was, you know, the result of the Black Hand assassination of the prince there. But you know, Germany did pop off. In World War II, the lead up to it was basically the capitulation of the corporate class and the political bourgeoisie, so to speak, towards the Nazis. They preferred them over the communists. They probably, economically speaking, thought this was the right decision to make, and actually things might have been worse. Had Hitler not actually gotten into office and the commies had come in, they might have purged more people. We're not sure, of course. We can't go down that separate timeline and investigate exactly what the fallout would have been. I suspect it would have been fucking worse in the end. I suspect that Germany would have ended up in a war with the West anyway, only it would have been helped by Stalin. We would have had a weird situation where the U.S. probably wouldn't have done Lend-Lease to Stalin and would have had to prop up the British and the French. Be an interesting timeline to explore, by the way. It would have been a very, very strange existence. You probably wouldn't have had the Cold War, and the West would have eventually crushed the Russians, the Soviet Union, and then, you know, Patton might have gotten his way in the end, so maybe it would have been in the end beneficial, but tens of millions of people would have died. I predicted that this scenario would happen, and it's not going to end immediately. You're going to get, as long as the German economy has any problems, as long as the youth is disaffected, and as long as the government attempts to suppress these uprising parties, you're going to get this sort of thing happening. What they should have done is they should have said, well, yeah, we need to reform. They could have done like what's happening in the United States. Like the Republican Party, clearly people were being wedged aside. The Democrats are going more far left, you know, the fucking socialists, the squad and shit like that. And the Republicans now move to the right. What they understood was that you needed a populist movement. You needed to actually care about the people that you say that you represent. You can't simply make them promises forever and never follow through with them. And that's the dynamic in the United States today. It's basically a doppelganger. Now, the United States has more or less successfully made that transition. The far left is being reabsorbed on one end. Populism is increasing in fervor to the point where, you know, Kamala Harris is literally copying Trump's homework because she realizes that it's a good strategy. She's trying to go full Clinton mode. You know, Clinton taking the homework of Ronald Reagan and adapting it slightly. In Germany, this has not yet happened. And so you get the rise of movements that are outside of the political orthodoxy. Again, not necessarily a bad thing. When I say that I'm warning of it, I'm not warning of like, oh, World War III is going to pop off, the Germans are going to go full Nazi or something like that. I'm just trying to say to the political establishment, when you've become out of touch and you don't really recognize the needs of the voters within your country, and your only response is to suppress outsiders who are offering other solutions, this is what you get. You're blessed with the AFD, actually, because they're capable of bringing reform without purging a bunch of people. If you ignore these parties that are simply outside of the orthodoxy, but otherwise are relatively innocuous. They just have different solutions to the problems that exist because, problems change over time. What happened 50 years ago doesn't necessarily mean it's applicable to today. If you ignore them and continue to try to suppress them, then eventually the people within that party that are more unorthodox, that are further out there, they will take command. And you'll end up with a movement that you do not want. Right now, you've got individuals running the AfD, and to an extent, actually, the leftoid parties in Germany, that simply have different solutions to the problems that you see today in Germany. Again, though, the tendency, it's like with the Soviet Union, for example. Lenin comes in. Leninism and Stalinism are not the same thing, now are they? Who was it who rose up within that particular political framework, took control, and then killed tens of millions of people? Or within China, disaffected population votes in a bunch of well, doesn't really vote them in, but adopts communism. Who ends up taking control? Is it the person who is level-headed, relatively sane, centrist to an extent? Or is it the person that says, hey, we're going to wage a war on sparrows? This has happened over and goddamn over within world history. And people don't seem to understand it. So, I'm sitting here, I'm taking a victory lap for having predicted exactly the situation. But at the same time, it's like, but if the German government, the so-called centrists there with their boring, outdated ideas, if they're not willing to reform things, they're going to end up with a fucking problem. That's the next prediction. They will probably do the latter. That's about all. Peace out.